Okay, hello everyone, and welcome for another episode of Littledata, live with Littledata. And this week I've got Rob here, and we're going to be talking. Rob knows a lot about data. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you. Yeah, great to be here. This is a topic that I'm really excited about, so happy to join you.
Cool. So just perhaps give us a quick background to start with, like, what's a bit of your recent experience in this field, and I know you work with lots of guys in this.
So right now I'm the managing director for theCUBE Research and a lead analyst. So I'm looking at the markets around data, how data is used, and things of that nature. But prior to that, I'd been on the data collection journey, I guess you could say, with being the head of product for Snowplow Analytics, building a SaaS platform that went out and did data collection and data pipelines, and working with all of the back-end infrastructure that you need to go and build things like recommendations engines and other pieces. Plus, even further back, I was at Amazon Web Services building services there.
Awesome. So I guess let's start with kind of, because obviously we're Littledata is mainly working with brands, direct consumer brands trading on Shopify, and I guess at a certain so typically they're starting off, they're obviously using Google Analytics, they've got some good setup there, and then I guess for various reasons, maybe because they've got offline sort of omni-channel data they want to bring into that, maybe because they've got more sophisticated analysis needs, they start to think, right, and I need maybe a more robust solution where I can start customizing a bit of this and pulling in some other data. So what are the sort of different, as a brand, imagine you're advising the sort of the e-commerce director, like what are the bits they need to get put together to sort of make a robust data solution?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is how are you going to collect the data, and how are you going to bring that, gather that data? How are you going to, implement your first party tracking methodology? Because again, third party cookies and things of that nature are going by the wayside. If you look at Google Analytics and their third party tracking, they've been outlawed in 5 countries in Europe, for instance. So when you start to look at how you're really tracking this data and how you're bringing it back, a first party tracking scenario is really where you want to get to. And in first party tracking, you're not always going to get necessarily the person's name or identifier out of there, but what you want to be able to do is understand and have tags, so that once they do log in or they do go to the cart and they check out, then all that data becomes relevant and is attached to them. So understanding your keys, your data modeling, and your data schema is super important, which is why it's really tough, because then you have to get the data somewhere, analyze it, put it in a data warehouse of some way, and trend it over time so you understand your customer's journey. And then you got to build models and transform that data to then go and do something with it. And you could be putting it out to another customer data platform to do reverse ETL, to do marketing campaigns. You could be modeling it so that you can build into your application some intelligence using, what the craze is with AI, but, real AI for doing that, which is not actually that hard.
Yeah. And in fact, that I've pushed this a bit the last year. Obviously, that in fact is one of the good reasons to actually have a data warehouse, that inevitably AI improves there, and what in order to do useful stuff, it needs raw sort of row level data, as I guess we might call it, to sort of actually be able to figure out what's going on and look at the patterns and all the different features that are leading to a certain outcome. So I've always pushed. So I guess one of the things I pushed last year is, look, have an insurance policy. At least start with kind of streaming what's from Google Analytics into BigQuery, because that's kind of like a free backup. In it, I think every brand should be doing that just from the point of view of effectively backing up what they're capturing on Google Analytics. But it also, from my mind, provides you've got it there. You might not use it at the moment. You might not have any prediction algorithms or whatever running on it. But at least if you wanted to build that kind of stuff in the future, you have a history of event level data captured.
Yeah, you absolutely want to do that. I mean, BigQuery is probably, I'd say, from my experience, is probably the most utilized because of Google Analytics and people piping Google Analytics in there. And just because you're doing that, that's not necessarily maybe enough data to achieve what your use case. So you have to be very use case specific. But Google does a really good job of making it easy to move that data around, and they have some pretty good AI tooling that goes around that as well. So I think that's another piece of it when you start to look at all of the different things that you can do. You want to simplify your pipelines, you want to simplify your data gathering, because you want to spend the time making the data powerful, making it your intellectual property, basically.
Right, exactly. So and that's another thing that I'm always pushing, is that brand, you don't need to have data engineering in house. Like, you shouldn't be like, that's not your core expertise. Like, let's not try and build something custom and complicated, because, as you say, if you're going to do anything with data, you want to be spending it on the actual insights and analysis part.
Yeah, and I think that's it. I mean, again, especially, you got to kind of look at your company and go, listen, do I want to hire a data scientist to go and do this? Or do I want to partner up with a CDP platform that actually has data scientists, or has people who understand how to get it to the right place, so that I can then do that analysis on top?
Yeah. And Littledata, we've partnered for a long time with Segment, and used by some of our larger customers. I think they are the most established custom data platform in the e-commerce is a small part of what they do, but they certainly have a decent number of e-commerce brands. And I guess the complaint there is it's expensive, but I think people often underestimate all that stuff that they're doing behind the scenes. There's a lot of complexity, and so I think we were talking before the call about one of our brands who's consider moving off Segment to High Touch, which was built by a bunch of Segment people. They also know what they're doing. But the bit they lack is, obviously, the High Touch assumes you've got the data in a warehouse. It's all, you've captured. And importantly, as you mentioned earlier, that you can identify all of these different events back to a visitor on your website, for example, because without that, you can't actually feed it into Google Ads or Facebook Ads to do anything from it. So the reverse ETL bit is only useful if you've got the data in the right format with the right identifiers.
Right. And that goes back to understanding your data model and understanding what data you're collecting. I mean, obviously, more data is better than less data. But to your point, that becomes expensive in some of these products like Segment. Now, Segment's also done some really interesting stuff where they've introduced what's called delta sharing. So you can actually dump Segment data out from Segment into things like Databricks and a data lake. And, again, that's a whole nother level of complexity that customers would then have to deal with. But you can get it as SaaS, you can get it in all the marketplaces. I look at it and go, it was a very smart move by the Segment folks to announce that at Databricks' conference back, I think that was back in the fall, in early November. But at the same time, you still need to gather that data, as you were saying. You need to get that data into a warehouse so you can transform it. And the cost, of doing that, like, for instance, Snowplow is an open source platform, has open source JavaScript trackers, for instance, that do a really good job, and they have them for mobile and stuff like that, that can actually work with other CDP platforms. So again, you kind of have to understand what you're trying to achieve and what data you're trying to bring back. Because like you said, going all the way to a High Touch, where maybe I do want to do some email marketing at reverse ETL and email marketing, and I want to keep my PII private and all of that good stuff. You got to understand that entire pipeline, and it's not necessarily the simplest thing. So looking at a packaged CDP makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I second that, because obviously we were working a lot with Klaviyo this last month, and I've been digging into a lot of the scenarios, and I guess this gets actually super complicated, just because there's so much value as a brand you can get from just identifying another. So what we were talking earlier is like the valuable people, obviously not the people who just bought, you know who they are, and they're not the people at the top of the funnel who just browsing the site. They're the people who are kind of mid funnel, there maybe added to cart but not got further. And if you can identify some more of those and be able to target them via email or with Meta or Google Ads, then that's really where you're going to get your biggest return on investment, because you can push them from nearly purchasing to actually purchasing. Now,
yeah, and you can gather data that is almost demographic in data. I mean, again,
yeah,
it's the spooky stuff that all the people at the end user side go, oh, I didn't realize that they could get my IP address from
yeah,
my Wi-Fi router at my house
yeah,
and kind of understand where I am in the world, and then be able to do demographic type stuff on that. It
yeah,
helps you do cluster analysis, and to your point, you can do stuff even without having their email or knowing who they are or having any of the PII.
yeah,
You can gather that data, and that can really give you a better understanding on, like you were saying, cart abandonment. Why did they get to this point? They put 3 things in there and then they jumped. What was it that made them jump at this point? Let me replay their journey through the site. And I think from a productization perspective, that becomes super interesting to brands, because you want to understand they got all the way to where they were they looking at something else and looking at
yeah.
another site, and they went and bought it there. What's our pricing on this? How do we compete? That can start to, help you understand some of the dynamics of the environment you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's on the other hand balancing with the fact that some of this does get quite creepy for the user, and there's a quite a fine line between where are you just as a brand, and basically you're entitled to, obviously, and a part of your terms and conditions is obviously you are going to track the customer and be able to market to them. But where is it where you've kind of gone over the line? So yeah, a lot of brands are using. I mean, there's 2 tools out there, kind of retention.com and Wonderkind, that do something similar. And what they're doing is basically taking an IP address, looking up a big table of kind of known email addresses for that IP address, and then kind of feeding it back. So you never gave that brand your email, but suddenly it pops up in your inbox. Now, I find that creepy personally. I think that's kind
Yeah.
of, for
Yeah,
me,
I think that's a super valid point, and really a good point is, how creepy do you want to be? And
yeah,
trying not to be
yeah,
too creepy, because that impacts the brand that you have, and people just don't come back. I mean, you can lose. People will go pay more for something to not be creepy.
sure. And I think a lot of American companies don't understand, fully that in Europe now, that and increasingly in certain US states, there's pretty big fines associated with going over the line. I mean, your chance of getting caught is low,
Yeah,
but if you do get caught, the penalties are high.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, we
and
do have one good one that's in CCPA out in California.
I
There's
think also
the
kind of similar. I mean, I think Colorado now, and is it
Virginia has
yeah,
one as well, VCCDA or PA or something like that. Too many acronyms, but it's similar to GDPR and
yeah,
some of that. We're way behind. I mean, the US is just way behind on privacy. It will come. I think it's needed and it's desired. I think that once the economy starts, rolling, inflation goes down, I think then people will start to worry about this kind of stuff. Right now, I think they're looking at it and saying, I'm willing to trade off the creepiness for lower prices. And I think at a certain equilibrium,
yeah.
we'll get to people really being concerned about how creepy is it.
Also, as one of my colleagues put it, I think a lot of consumers don't really know the difference between visiting your site and giving you an email. As in, if they've gone to your site and they get an email from you, they sort of assume there was a valid way you could have got that, which is, I think, why these tools
Yeah.
sort of work. They're not. I mean, obviously, if you get a cold email from somebody site you've never been to, that's different. But if you kind of remember that, yeah, you were browsing that product.
I
I
mean, people have been buying marketing lists forever, right? I
yeah,
mean,
right,
you talk about the mailing lists and going
yeah,
back to the pre-web, and you'd get a catalog for something, and you're sitting there going, "How the hell did I get this catalog? Why did I get this catalog?" And they're going to these houses and doing. It's the same thing for emails. So to your point, I'm not as concerned about that. It's more the spam text messages and other stuff that you know could pile on that they can go and buy from these houses. That sometimes it's the brands have to consider how are they using the data versus how do they want to be perceived for using the data.
yeah. No, exactly. This can be brand damaging. Let's get back to the challenge of the data collection. So obviously from Snowplow, you know quite a bit about that. So as you said, let's assume for whatever reason, as a brand, you do want to have, a data warehouse where you've actually got sort of, useful things. We talked about as one route, which is to use the Google Analytics to BigQuery. How does Snowplow differ from that, and kind of what are the pros and cons?
Yeah, so I mean, Snowplow was able to do, and again, there's an open source and a paid for platform that they have. And what it does is it has all of these open source connectors to various different things, be it, app for Apple for their iPhones, be it for web and web browsers, and where they're able to do first party tracking in that. And so they do a lot on the collection side. What they also do a lot of is they help you build a pipeline into that data warehouse. And I think that's part of it, because you can go and build it out of any of these cloud providers. They all have pipeline like technology that can move the data, queuing type stuff, and you can go RabbitMQ. There's a whole number of open source pieces in that. So first you collect the data, then you have to move it somewhere. Then you have to, once you move it somewhere, you have to load the data. So loading the data is also where Snowplow had built some technology that was able to then go and load it into the different data warehouses. People like, I'll use Snowflake because they have something called Snowpipe, and they've gone and created and made it easier to load into data into there. Google has a similar type of configuration where they can make it easier to load your data as well. So you basically drop the data into an object store, and then you load that data into, say, BigQuery. Usually going straight into the database. The databases can, depending on which type of database, if it's not really transactional in nature, it can be overwhelmed pretty easily.
Well, I think the common choice, you say, a Snowflake, BigQuery, or Redshift, and I think all of them are pretty good at now.
And Databricks too. It depends. I think, again, it depends on what you're doing with the data. If you're more the AI ML side, we see a lot, or I see even today a lot of Databricks actually coming into equilibrium with Snowflake. And then you have, like you said, I mean, BigQuery is way out there in advance. We see some stuff coming up from Microsoft as well. They actually have their Fabric product that they're pushing. And then you also have, I would say further behind is Redshift, because it has some scalability issues. Now, I will say they're also trying to solve those. And having worked at Amazon, I wouldn't bet against Amazon being able to compete there.
It does seem like Redshift was quite popular kind of 10 years ago. It feels like they slightly dropped behind in terms of adoption.
But it's cheap. And I think this is the thing, right? Is like Redshift's cheap. So is BigQuery's relatively cheap. And you start to look at Snowflake is probably the most expensive out of those four. So again, it goes back to, what are you trying to do with the data? And do you have an agreement with one of these providers? Like if you're already using Google Analytics to get the data, it's really easy to then just drop it into a BigQuery and then use a lot of their stuff like Looker or what have you, or on top of that.
And to be honest, I think that making that big Google Analytics to BigQuery link, I think, was a genius move on Google's behalf, because they're using the clout they have on the free usage of Google Analytics to drive their cloud platform. Because, as you say, it's probably, well, I'm pretty sure globally is the single biggest use for BigQuery. And so once it's there, and I was just playing around with it yesterday, there's lots of tools for kind of manipulating within Google's cloud, moving to other places, but no tools for getting it out of Google's cloud. Obviously, there's no incentive for them to make it easy for you to move into Snowflake or whatever.
And I think they also have, I mean, Google's doing a really good job and has a lot of native AI. I mean, they have their Gemini large language model. So if you wanted to be able to go and talk to your data, you can ask it questions. You can look at things like that. And again, it's it's kind of how Google's grown up. They know how to move this data around. Amazon's more siloed in the number of services. I would say that, like you said, I put Google at the top as most users. Then it's Snowflake, Databricks, and then Redshift, kind of in that way.
One thing I haven't played with actually, but in theory it should be super powerful because the Google Analytics schema obviously is stable. I didn't mean stable. I meant standard, right? And it's one of the things I've always said. I know Snowflake gives you lots of cut. That's one of the pros, right? You can choose your own sort of schema and your own tracking plan, whatever. But that's also one of the disadvantages because as a brand, you've also got to plan, care, and think about that.
Yeah.
Depends on your culture whether you wanted to. But one of the things I was saying is that Google Analytics has a standard like e-commerce schema. They have a standard way of linking products and customers and stuff. And so if you use that, then the data in BigQuery is going to be standard properties and fields. And that means that you should be able to use an AI tool kind of out the box. It already knows someone else, it knows exactly how that data model works and how all the fields relate to each other. So again, I don't know whether Google or anyone else has built that, but it feels like it's an obvious step that if you can describe the data relationships, build that data graph within the BigQuery data, it should be really easy to plug in as you say, AI tool and say, hey, what's my best performing channel, or because the marketing channel maps to sessions in this way.
Correct. And so I think if you look at it, there have been people who've built stuff on top of that. You can even go look at like DBT, who's very heavy from an open source perspective and from DBT Cloud perspective. They have a robust, I would say, community of data engineering people who've gone and built DBT packages to go. There was even a DBT Snowplow package. Now Snowplow builds their own and puts those out as part of their service. But there's a lot of knowledge out there for doing that and being able to take your data and massage it. That you don't have to be a data expert. And I think that, again, it goes back to getting the data somewhere in a common schema. Like you said, okay, I know it's using Google Analytics. It's using the standard schema. It's putting it in there. Okay, let me go around and, Google or what have you, find DBT packages that have been written by people, that may even be in my same, my same sphere and, have the same problems.
I actually don't know. I did like a year ago. I must have another little look about. There must be a DBT package for GA4 data in BigQuery. It's such a common. Someone must have done that. I was actually going to write one myself because I thought it was such an obvious need, but then I figured
there is. I can guarantee you there is. I'm part of that community, and I actually, they got a great Slack community. You can go in there and sign up for their Slack and ask somebody, and they're very forthcoming and helping you find that stuff. And sometimes, and a lot of it is because DBT Core is runs on your laptop, not highly, it's not for across an entire company like a large company. That's where the DBT Cloud comes in. But what you can do with it is you can actually connect it to your data, do the transformations, and see the outputs right from your laptop. So you're not incurring some great cost, or you can go put it on an instance in a cloud if you want to, you don't want different fees to come out. So
actually, just while you're talking about, there is absolutely, there you go. Matatika's built a package which is designed to just clear up the actual schema for the BigQuery data is horrible to work with. So you've got to do some transformations before it's kind of usable as an analyst.
Absolutely.
Cool. Then I think the final topic, perhaps, that we were chatting about earlier was, at the other end of the sort of spectrum, like you collect your data, and then you've got, as you say, you've got to get it into a usable format in a warehouse. So DBT is one of them. And you were saying, which I found quite interesting, that there's a lot of buzz about no ETL at the moment, and that obviously ETL software of old, even more modern ones like Fivetrans, quite expensive, quite complicated, and I guess there's quite a lot of people who have incentive to push. Oh, you don't need that, So tell us a bit what's the buzz about no ETL and what are you skeptical of?
Yeah, so if you look at the people who are pushing no ETL, it was all the buzz in December because Amazon came out and announced that, Redshift and all of the databases and things that they've built, you can rely on no ETL. So basically, if you go and dump it into an object store, you basically don't need to move it around to use it for different things, but you have multiple databases that actually have representations of the data per se, or their actual links back. I think you still need to transform the data. So I think no E and L, no extraction and load. Yeah, fine. I get that. But the transform on top of the data warehouse is really, when you talk ELT, which is what most companies are doing today, they're getting it into the data warehouse and then transforming it versus doing extraction, transform, and load. I get it, what they're saying about it. I think it's complete, rubbish, for using a very kind word for it. But I think that when you start to look at it, you have to transform the data. Not having multiple copies saves you money. And that's kind of where Amazon's aiming at, is saying, hey, you can use this data multiple different ways without transforming it first. I think they would have been better off saying no EL, do your T on top and only store the T.
And that makes total sense. I mean, I remember this is what Matillion's big pitch was like a few years ago for Redshift, right? That they were ELT rather than ETL. That you load it into Redshift and then actually it's super cheap and quick to use Redshift to do the transformation. But as you say, not doing the transformation just means that you've got a bloated and unworkable data set. So
yeah, and there's a number of companies out there like Matillion, there's Starburst, there's a number, even HPE has their Esmeralda product, which is based on Presto, a company they bought that, does that. Databricks has some stuff that does that. So when you look at the whole, what they would call data mesh, that you can do the transformation at that layer as well, instead of trying to do it in a standard warehouse. So it all depends on, again, your level of sophistication and how far you want to go. Now, like people like Starburst have a SaaS delivered service that can make connecting these things to, because you may have multiple different warehouses with multiple different data sets, because maybe you have your online ordering data in one data warehouse or one instance of, Redshift or wherever you have it. And then you have your Google Analytics data over in your BigQuery. How do you bring that data together in a cost-effective way? These data meshes tend to be more cost-effective at that, because they're not going to spend a lot of your egress, and you're not necessarily moving a lot of data around. You're bringing back results, kind of like doing joins across databases.
Yeah. Awesome. So kind of finally, what would be your advice to this brand, that's wanting to get more, they set themselves a New Year resolution to get a bit more mature about how they work with data this year. What are some of the priorities you think they should have really as to
I think, like we were talking about, it's data collection and understanding what data you want to get, because you need to understand your customer journey. So how have you built your site, and how do you want to instrument that site? Then is your traffic coming from mobile? Is it coming from web? Is it coming from both, 50-50? Understanding that, so you have the right trackers in place to understand that. At the same time, I would personally start with a packaged CDP. I know they cost more, but I look at it and go, just trying to get the data out makes a lot of sense to do that. But looking for people, to help you along that way, where they have the connectors to where you're collecting the data, is super important. And I think that, because having the data pipelines tend to be the most expensive piece of these, because, especially at scale, and it all depends on, how many, most of the CDPs have some sort of transaction based pricing. So you can understand, okay, if I do this many transactions and events, this, I don't know how many events it's going to trigger, do a try and buy before, so you understand how many, different items you're actually pulling back, and then see if you can tune that. as well.
Yeah. Awesome. I think that's all we've got time for this week. But thanks very much for all your views, and I hope the world of data treats you well this year.
Absolutely, much appreciated. Take
Okay.
care.
Thanks, Rob. Bye.